Howdy there. Today we had to move rooms for junior church because we got froze out. It's only 54 degrees in the other room, so we brought the lesson in, but we had a smaller group, so it turned out pretty good. Let me see, is that in focus? Yes. Okay, I think so. Pretty good. Our lesson today is called Down Through the Roof. And our verse is from Mark chapter 2, verse 7. Who can forgive but God? Who can forgive but God? We first talk. I try to set it up a little bit, get them kind of so that when we tell the lesson, they are a little bit involved in it. I try to get them into the feel of it, into the get into the people's shoes a little bit as we can. But we talked about how if we tore up somebody's, if we broke something at someone's house, if we've ever really made a mess, or if the kids were to just go crazy on sugar, which I usually wait till after the lesson to get them all on sugar, but if they broke something in here, and who would Brother Earl and the rest of the church come to? They would come to me. So we talked a little bit about the feeling of when you broke something that belongs to somebody else and things like that. Before we got into this lesson, and this lesson, I don't like to call them stories because they're not just stories. These are real events that really happened and people saw, people wrote about. This was an account. Like if we could go back in time, if they had a video camera back then, this is kind of what you would have seen. So this is a real event, and it happened in Capernaum, and I don't know if it's Capernaum or Capernaum. I'm going to say Capernaum. In Capernaum, let me set up my room here, and got that. All right, I guess that's pretty much the extent of this house. In Capernaum, there was a man who had an illness called palsy. We talked about a little bit about palsy, and some of them had family that had palsy. I have a cousin whose daughter is affected by that. She has a great, brilliant mind, but her body, her legs aren't formed well. The muscles are really, really small. She's in a wheelchair. And the struggles that she has with that, and Mikey has a cousin who was born with cerebral palsy, and the effects of that they go through with this. But this man, so he couldn't move. I don't know if it was just his legs or what, but he could not walk. So we talked about what palsy was and how it affects your life, and kind of maybe what this man went through a little bit. Again, I love to get the kids get yourself into the scene of this. Think about how they would feel, because that's where you really remember, and that's where you really get a good glimpse of Jesus, and that's what we got in this lesson. So there was a man in Capernaum, and he had an illness called palsy, and he could not get up or walk like other people. His friends knew he was miserable because he couldn't get about. But they didn't know that the man was unhappy for other reasons as well. He knew he had done many wrong things in his life, and it was thinking about them that made him really unhappy. And I never was preached this or taught this, but this was always something that I suspected, and we talked about this in an adult Bible study one night a long time ago. But this man, I don't think that he came to Jesus for healing. I think that he came to Jesus for forgiveness. And it's because of what Jesus says to him. And we'll just get to that part. But I love that this was written out this way. So this man, it was thinking about all of the things that he had done wrong that made him really unhappy. One day he'd lay on his bed. 4 of his friends came rushing up. Jesus, the teacher, is back in Capernaum, they said. There are crowds of people following him everywhere. And he has been healing lots of sick people. So they come to his friend and tell him this. And first of all, we talked about how they called Jesus a teacher. And Jesus was, people looked at him very differently. Some people saw him as a great teacher. Some people saw him as a prophet. And very few, Peter actually said, "You are the Christ," which is what he was. But some saw him as a teacher, or a great prophet. There are a lot of religions. I could go down so many rabbit holes. But anyway. It's hard for me to stay just on one thing. So they said this teacher, and he has healed people. And so the man who was paralyzed said, "If only I could get to him," he said, "perhaps he could cure me too. But there is no hope of that. I can't walk. I can't get to Jesus. And he isn't likely to come to my house." When Jesus, there was a lot of sick people around, and he was thronged with people a lot. In fact, this house was just surrounded with people. So it wasn't likely that Jesus would go into that house. But that was a hurdle. That was like his mountain. That was something that was keeping him from Jesus, was his physical ability. Then one of his friends had an idea, and we talked about how sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that can be a bad thing, where it all starts with a friend had an idea. Why couldn't we take you to him? His friend suggested. We could carry you on your bed. They each grabbed a corner of his bed and off they went. It was easy to tell which house Jesus was in because there was a huge crowd of people all around the door. Please let us through, said the four friends. This man needs to be healed. But no one would let them in. His friends, however, were not going to be put off so easily. They were sure Jesus would help if they could only reach him. The house had a flat roof and an outside staircase leading up to it. This gave the friends another idea. So they're carrying him on his bed. So they overcame that hurdle. Hey, you know what? Not being able to get to Jesus, not a problem anymore. We'll carry you. They get to the house and they can't get in because it's just so many people are in there and all around it. Another obstacle. At that point, I would have understood if they had said, you know what, we tried. Or, you know what, we'll wait out here. Maybe he'll come out this way. Maybe we can still get you to him. But, you know, the circumstance before us is just too much of a hurdle. But that wasn't, instead of seeing it that way, they looked for another option. They looked outside the box, you could say, and they went on top of the roof, and they carried their friend. Look at the effort that would have been to carry this man. And I thought, man, the poor fella on a stretcher, I mean, I would have been, it's like, they're going to drop me. It would have been very difficult for me to be the fella on the stretcher in that scenario because I'm a control freak and I would think they're going to drop me. So this was not an easy task. It was very difficult. They had to go over a lot of obstacles to get this man to Jesus, and it was their friend. And I wonder, we have to ask ourselves, are we that kind of friend? That I would go through everything that this took to get my friend to Jesus. Am I that kind of friend? It's beautiful. Actually, another sidetrack. I went to a funeral. I had a patient, and it was it's odd to say, but it was the most wonderful funeral I'd ever been to. They wanted a celebration of this man's life, and I stood out like a sore thumb because there was only me and one other white person in this church. And so that's odd, you know, that to be in that circumstance. And So I sat in the back, and everybody else is dressed very beautifully, all dark. I was on duty, so I was wearing my all whites, white girl, white clothes, red jacket. I stood out like a sore thumb. But I began to, this young preacher, I think he wasn't even maybe 20 years old, and he gave the most inspiring message using this very message at this funeral. And he talked about how they got up on the top of the roof and they've done so much to get their friend to where he needed to be, the character of these friends. But then the point that this preacher made at that funeral was they got this man, and they finally get him to this point, and as we're going to see, they tore off the roof of this house to get the man down to Jesus. They just, how can I get in there? How can we get in there? How can we get in there? I would love to be surrounded with those kind of friends. But they talked about how when they were lowering this man, might as well go off the script. So they're up here and they're tearing off the roof, which was just amazing to even think that someone would do that. And they lowered him down right at the feet of Jesus. And this fella, he's got his eyes closed, but he was the only, head that I could find for the story. So they lower him down, but at this funeral, this preacher, he talked about how they had to take that step of letting their friend go and just leaving him at the feet of Jesus and saying, this is as far as I can take you. And that stuck with me and stuck with me and stuck with me. That I have so many people that I love that I would love to get them to this point. There are a lot of hurdles. I'd love to get them to this point, and that there comes a time when they've done everything that they can do. It's now between them and Jesus. And that's hard to say, I love them so much, but I think that I've done all I can do. And Jesus, they're just at your feet. And we have to love them enough, as these friends did their friend, love them enough to let them go. And that is very hard. But they did exactly that. So they bent over the hole and they guided the mat to the ground right at Jesus' feet. Jesus looked at the poor sick man. The man, I don't know why I don't have these fellows here. They were a big crowd. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say this, but I kind of wonder if it's Peter's house. I knew that he lived in Capernaum, and so I think that it would be kind of funny if this is Peter's house and the reaction that Peter had. But the Bible doesn't record, but that's just my own little take on this. I think it would be actually appropriate. It's not far-fetched. But anyway, so they lower him at Jesus' feet, and Jesus looked at the poor sick man. And we talked about the character of Jesus, because what we see Jesus do, how we see Jesus respond to people is exactly how he feels about us and how he will respond to us in our needs. So Jesus's, we talked about how sometimes even like close people to us, they'll have something that is so valuable that we don't dare touch it, that's so valuable to them. I've been in actually some families' homes that everything is so clean and stuff, and you feel like you are a burden to be there because you're a high-risk person to get stuff dirty. And but I think the biggest example is when someone has a brand new car. Don't you dare ride your bike near that car. You don't put anything in it. Don't you spill. I mean, you don't, that's the baby. They're the baby. The car is the baby of the family, and you don't mess with the baby. And so we talked about how Jesus cared. His focus was on this man, and he cared about him right away. Obviously, he was a man who needed him, and he did. Think about this. It's kind of like if I had a brand new car and one of the kids came along and they rode their bikes and they scraped a big scratch down the side. what would be